We explored on the channel in an earlier video general aspects of world building and how to make it more thematically relevant, enhance characterization and provide plot beats. Now, I want to go into some of the most popular subgenres and explore this topic specifically to them. The ideal place to start could be no other than epic fantasy. What is so captivating about the worlds of The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Wheel of Time? These epic fantasy stories feel alive, brimming with history, culture, and magic extending beyond the main conflict. Middle-earth enchants with its ancient myths and detailed languages. Westeros intrigues with its complex politics and morally grey characters. And the vast lands of Randland awe us with their diverse cultures shaped by millennia of prophecy and conflict. Each world immerses us and makes us feel like we're living in it.
The idea of the video is to dissect what is special about epic fantasy world building and what other fantasy subgenres can learn from it, from developing a deep sense of history and culture to weaving them seamlessly into your narrative. Let's figure out what can be practically done to bring your epic fantasy world building to life. Let's get to it.
Epic fantasy is defined by several key elements that distinguish it from other fantasy subgenres.
For starters, I want to explore which are these key elements that make epic fantasy what it is. When I think of epic fantasy, the world building needs to be both deep and wide. Deep in the sense that it feels like the author fleshed out a lot of the history, and wide in the sense that it feels like the author knows what is beyond the borders of the geographical region in which the story is contained, even when it's not explicitly on the page.
At the heart of every great epic fantasy lies a deep and complex lore that makes the world feel like it existed long before the story began. Ancient wars, fallen empires, and forgotten gods influence the present and characters' lives. There is no better example of this than Middle-earth. Its rich tapestry of lore stretches back to the creation of the world, the rise and fall of Numenor, the forging of the Rings of Power, and the ancient conflicts with Sauron and Morgoth create a sense of weight and consequence that permeates every corner of the story. Frodo's journey to destroy the One Ring is both a personal mission and the culmination of millennia of struggle and sacrifice, with echoes of past heroism and tragedy shaping the stakes of the present. In Middle-earth, the world feels alive, where every ruin, song, and tale carry the burden of untold stories, drawing readers into a universe that feels as vast and real as our own. In epic fantasy, landscapes can also be used to add characterization to the societies that inhabit them, influencing their traditions, languages, and ways of life. For example, in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, the harsh, storm-battered world of Roshar creates resilient and adaptive societies. The Alethi, living on the high storm-exposed plains, build their cities in sheltered areas and develop a militaristic, survival-oriented culture. In contrast, the Shin, who reside in the quiet, sheltered valleys, have a peaceful, agrarian lifestyle and view warfare as dishonorable. These stark differences in geography reflect directly in the cultures, languages, and moral frameworks of these people. It helps to make a setting immersive when the author thinks about how geography and cultural aspects of a society influence and are influenced by the people in it. When you spend some time thinking about this, you avoid making the societies in your world building feel like cardboard cutouts.
Another trope of epic fantasy for me is how high the stakes are. There are a lot of fantasy stories out there with a slice of life, cozy, domestic kind of scope, but epic fantasy usually has stakes that involve the fate of entire nations or even the planet. There are epic battles between good versus evil, and the decisions made by the characters can really scale.
Epic fantasy thrives on high stakes. The scale of conflict elevates the story to mythic proportions. These stories often explore themes of good versus evil, though not always in simplistic terms, as the protagonists must confront moral ambiguity and personal sacrifice. For example, in the Chronicles of Narnia, the battle between Aslan and the White Witch represents a clash between hope and despair, life and eternal winter. The stakes are also personal for the Pevensey siblings, who must grow into their roles as leaders and make difficult choices, but the conflict also holds cosmic implications for all of Narnia. Frodo's quest to destroy the One Ring is both a personal journey and a battle for the soul of Middle-earth, with the looming shadow of Sauron threatening to plunge the world into eternal darkness. In the Wheel of Time as well, the struggle against the Dark One is an existential fight for reality itself, with the fate of past, present, and future hanging in the balance. Be careful though, a large scale doesn't necessarily mean the reader will automatically care about the fate of the setting, if you didn't lay the groundwork for that before.
Another way the world building in epic fantasy feels expansive is the large cast of characters. Heroes, anti-heroes, mentors and villains, all playing their role to contribute to the world building's complexity. The subgenre also often employs multiple points of view to explore different facets of the world and central conflict.
For example, A Song of Ice and Fire uses a broad array of POV characters to reveal the complex politics, cultural nuances, and personal stakes across Westeros and beyond. The audience gains a multifaceted understanding of the world by seeing the story unfold through the eyes of rulers, soldiers, commoners, and outcasts, where every character's choice ripple across the larger narrative, enhancing its depth and emotional impact.
The final element I believe characterizes epic fantasy is heroism. The hero's journey will often be explored, even if in a more subtle way in some cases. The subgenre deals a lot of war and conflict in an epic scale, so this usually lends itself to exploring heroism and heroic sacrifice.
At the heart of epic fantasy lies the hero's journey, a transformative quest that propels the protagonist toward their destiny while shaping the world around them. These quests often involve defeating an evil force, reclaiming lost power, or uncovering their true purpose. Along the way, the protagonist undergoes growth, evolving into a symbol of hope or change. Rand al'Thor in The Wheel of Time begins as a humble farmer but grows into the Dragon Reborn, grappling with the burden of saving the world while wrestling with his own humanity. Geralt in the Witcher series embarks on a journey of self-discovery, balancing his identity as a monster hunter with his moral compass and his connections to those he loves. These transformative journeys reflect the struggles of growth and change, making the characters both larger than life but also relatable. Epic fantasy is not perfect though.
And depending on what you want to explore in your story, maybe it is not the most recommended subgenre for you to use as a starting point. Next, I want to discuss some of the weaker aspects of epic fantasy.
Like any subgenre, epic fantasy is not without its flaws. While we love immersing ourselves in these sprawling narratives, there are a few areas where epic fantasy can fall short. Let's look at some of the common pitfalls and limitations that come with these stories. Epic fantasy often prioritizes world building and grand narratives over character depth, resulting in archetypal or predictable characters. Heroes may feel like vessels for the plot, rather than fully fleshed out individuals. Because the narration feels sometimes ethereal and distant, it is hard to convey your character's struggles in a human and visceral way, like grimdark usually achieves better.
This makes a lot of sense though. If your world is endlessly complex, but also your characters, it becomes quite difficult to establish a through line for the plot, and you can also end up bogging down your pacing. But with this in mind, if you're interested in reading or writing stories in which characters are super complex and contradictory, epic fantasy may not be your best pick.
Due to the sprawling scope of epic fantasy, the pacing can drag, with lengthy exposition, travel sequences, or subplots slowing down the story. Think of Wheel of Time and how much the intricate descriptions, often repetitive, bog down the pacing. If you're looking to read or write stories in which the plot keeps moving forward in a streamlined and solid pace, maybe epic fantasy isn't for you. Epic fantasy often relies on well-worn tropes such as the Chosen One, the Dark Lord, or a quest to save the world. Without fresh twists, these can feel stale or predictable. If you really like these tropes, you may try to write them in a way to explore what they actually mean, or subvert them instead of just including them at face value, which may cause the reader to feel like you didn't think too much about what you were trying to achieve with their inclusion. The emphasis on grand, world-changing events can sometimes overshadow smaller, more personal stakes, making it harder for readers to emotionally connect with the characters.
On a rational level, you may understand why the end of the world is a bad thing, but it won't matter to you if the author didn't spend enough time making you care about the characters on a micro level. Also, keep in mind that smaller stakes can be emotionally resonant too.
Themes of good versus evil can feel simplistic or one-dimensional, with villains often portrayed as irredeemably evil and heroes as paragons of virtue, leaving little room for moral ambiguity. It gets a bit surface level as well when an entire race is depicted as evil or good. It often comes across as lazy and simplistic. The desire to showcase intricate lore and history can lead to heavy-handed info dumping that disrupts the story's flow and immersion. It is often better to convey world-building elements, weaving this information in a sparse and subtle way, or maybe through dialogue, in a way to also convey a character's point of view about that element. The sheer length of epic fantasy series can deter readers, with some stories stretching across dozens of books, often with diminishing returns. This leads to a problem in which it becomes impossible for the author to tie back all the story threads in a satisfactory way, which leads to our final problem. With so many threads and characters, epic fantasy often struggles to deliver satisfying conclusions, leaving unresolved arcs or rushed endings.
In a multiple novel epic fantasy series, think of how many threads are initiated by the author. It is a gargantuan task to tie them all at the end in a way that feels satisfactory. No wonder Martin is taking so long to finish A Song of Ice and Fire. He seems like a perfectionist and is probably exploring a lot of different story paths to see what fits the whole story better. Now, I want to move on to discussing some iconic examples of epic fantasy, if you really want to be well versed on the subgenre. Let's briefly discuss the most relevant ones and what they do specifically well.
Obviously, I cannot make this list without Lord of the Rings. It is the gold standard for epic fantasy when it comes to history, languages, and mythology. Middle-earth feels real because it has such a deep backstory, ancient wars, fallen kingdoms, and even fully developed languages like Elvish. Every detail, from the songs to the ruins, makes you feel like this world has existed for thousands of years, long before Frodo's journey even starts. The narration, however, can feel sometimes a little ethereal and disconnected to the characters' humanity in a more personal level. If you want a fantasy series that goes all in on complexity, Malazan, Book of the Fallen, is where it's at. Steven Erikson throws you into a world packed with complicated societies, ancient gods, and a magic system that doesn't follow the usual fantasy rules. The story isn't afraid to challenge you, but the payoff is a world that feels massive and full of mysteries you'll want to unravel. A Song of Ice and Fire is all about the messy, morally grey side of fantasy. It's political scheming, shifting loyalties, and personal ambition on a huge scale. And then you've got the looming threat of the White Walkers and the mysteries of places like Valyria, which add a mythic vibe to the gritty, real-world drama. The characters are explored in a very intimate and visceral way, which makes the story feel very human and personal, despite the larger-than-life world-building elements. The Stormlight Archive has one of the most unique fantasy worlds out there. Roshar is defined by constant, devastating storms that influence everything. How people build their cities, how plants and animals survive, and even how the magic works. It's a world where every detail ties back to the environment, making it feel fresh compared to more traditional settings. It is not my favorite, but does a good job at honoring more traditional aspects of epic fantasy while still feeling fresh. Epic fantasy is a genre of grandiosity. Its world building should have histories, unique cultures, and complex magic systems make them feel alive, while the expansive casts and epic conflicts can keep us hooked. But it's not without its challenges. Sometimes the characters can feel a bit thin, the pacing can drag, or the sheer scope can overwhelm both writers and readers. Still, when done well, epic fantasy offers a one-of-a-kind experience that's equal parts awe-inspiring and deeply human.
Let me know in the comments if there are any other defining traits or limitations of the subgenre that I forgot to mention, or another series that does a good job at exploring it. Also, let me know what other subgenres we should discuss in the future videos in the comments.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and may your tales be ever epic.